What's your take on the handshake between Prime Minister Modi and modern day Mao of China? Is there going to be some normalcy in the relationship between India and China? Manmat says Xi Jinping and Modi ji finally shook hands at the G20 summit in Bali. What future does do India China relations hold in the upcoming years? Look, let me say this all over one more time. I will keep saying this. India cannot trust China. The Chinese are a hegemonic, expansionist, imperialist power. Right? That's the core focus of the Chinese Communist Party, to make China the number one nation in the world at the expense of everybody else. They don't want a bipolar world. They don't want a multipolar world. They want a unipolar world with China at the center. China is the imperial power. Everybody else is their vassal. Everybody else comes and pays tribute to China. That is the envisioned world order, and that's their worldview. That's the kind of world they would like to create. Now they have faced setbacks of late. The coronavirus crisis has been a disaster for China. It's still a big problem in China. They still have this zero lockdown policy and all that. So their rise to ascendancy has been greatly delayed. They still hope that they will replace the US as the sole superpower, but it's still just a hope. The Belt and Road Initiative, which was supposed to be the vehicle that takes China there, has kind of stalled. But they would like to restart it with the help of BRICS plus, expanded BRICS and all that. Yeah, so that's the situation. Yeah. Um, so if so, it is also in good for India if there is a new emerging world order. We don't want a Chinese dominated unipolar world order. We want a multipolar world order. A multipolar world order in which there are multiple sources, centers of power, multiple poles: India, China, Russia, the US led bloc, the Western bloc, and so on. Maybe we would like some nations in Africa also to step up if it's possible to free them from Western colonization and all that. So India seeks a multipolar world. And the how do you make such a multipolar world come about? Well, the most important uh, factor, or the most important vehicle that India can use for creating a multipolar world order would be BRICS plus, because now more than a dozen nations have stated that they want to join BRICS. Many nations have actually applied officially. Indonesia applied this week at the G20 summit to join BRICS. Um, Other nations have also applied. So BRICS is a block that's going to expand. It's going to be BRICS plus. It will still be called BRICS. We cannot keep on adding letters of the alphabet to it, but it's going to be called BRICS plus or BRICS plus plus, whatever it is. By 2025, 2026, you could have maybe 5, 6 more nations that are members of BRICS, maybe more. We will see how it goes. The Saudis want to join. So G20, we had this G20 summit, right? G20 has been hijacked by the US and the G7 nations. If you look at the wording of the final statement of the G20 summit, it's you can see there's so much references to Russia and Ukraine and war, which has nothing to do with the other nations. So it's been hijacked by the G7 nations, especially by the US. The G7s are all US vassals. I keep using this word vassal, but it's something that you will see lots of other major publications also starting to use nowadays. All right. So G20 has been hijacked by the US. I mean, what business does Ursula von der Leyen have being at the G20 summit? The EU is not a member of G20. Individual nations are members of G20. There are 20 nations, and yet all these things are imported into G20 and so on. So the core nations of G20, especially the Eastern nations, the Asian nations, I can assure you they do not like this. They do not like their G20 organization being co-opted and hijacked in this manner. Yeah, they also have their own national interests to pursue. They would like there to be more trade, more interoperationality, more cooperation between especially the so-called global south and the Eastern nations. So for that they have ASEAN, they also have other things as well. So the focus will now move more towards that. And they will also now want to be part of BRICS, because BRICS has nothing to do with the G7 nations or NATO or the EU or the US. So that's where they will feel more comfortable. That's where they see enormous potential for growth and progress. So that's why BRICS is becoming more and more attractive to these nations. But BRICS is a non starter if the two major nations within BRICS their leaders can't even talk to each other. We have these tensions with China, the undemarcated border, the Chinese occupied Tibet, which they occupied in the 1950s, and the Chinese claims on Indian territory, and the recent military clashes, the Galwan clashes, or the other the salami slicing tactics of China, trying to encroach here and there all the time, constantly. This is a major point of friction. It could even lead to a war in the future. If this situation continues, BRICS is a non starter. BRICS cannot be a viable organization. And India understands that. The Chinese also understand that. And that's why it looks like there's been some diplomacy behind the scenes. And it was agreed that India and China, the leaders, will meet, albeit briefly, just for a couple of minutes, just a brief greeting, some pleasantries, a few words exchanged, and that's it. In full view of the world, in public, at the G20 official dinner, whatever that event was. So that was a message to the nations that want to join BRICS, that we can make things work. You don't need to worry about it, right? Because it is good for India if BRICS expands and like-minded nations join. It's also good for China. They would like to use BRICS for their own purposes, of course. They would like to restart the BRI, the Belt and Road thing. Yeah, and they could use BRICS to kickstart it. But it's also good for India that more influence and more power comes towards BRICS. Rather, it's all, the entire world is right now under the stranglehold of the West. Everything, the so-called rules-based world order, the whims-based world order. So we would like to see a parallel system emerging, which is more in our favor. Of course, the Chinese will be involved. Of course, the Russians are involved. We can trust Russia. India and Russia have no friction points whatsoever. But China is the problem that Russia and India don't trust. But we will have to find a way to work together. And that's the reason why the handshake happened. It doesn't mean things are going to be normal. I would still be surprised if the Chinese agree to actually uh, finally demarcate the India-Tibet border. That entire process will take a few years, but it's never started. They have these endless rounds of meetings between India and China in which nothing, no progress ever happens. The Chinese are doing this deliberately. They're deliberately stalling this. They have no interest in demarcating the border. Well, I think India will have to negotiate with the Chinese hard. India will have to play hardball that if you do want this thing to go forward, BRICS, if you do want normalcy in BRICS, if you want BRICS to be a viable organization, these are the non-negotiable conditions. So maybe there is some progress perhaps happening in that matter. We don't know. Negotiations, diplomacy always happens in secret. Negotiations always happen in secret. Maybe something is happening, maybe something is not. We don't know. Assuming it's happening, we hope that things can get better. But we have to always remember that we cannot trust China. All right? So maybe things are getting better. Maybe India-China relations will improve. But even if they do improve, we have to always be wary. China is much more powerful militarily and economically. We have to ensure that we catch up with them. So that's got to be the main focus. India ideally needs another 20 years without any major conflict, major war. Then we can deal with the world. Yeah. So that is our focus, and BRICS will help us go in that direction. If we can maintain some kind of normalcy, even fake normalcy with China, it will be great. Next 20 years. So that's what's happening. That is the future of India-China relations. There could still be war. Who knows? If the Chinese so decide, India will not initiate any war. But if the Chinese so decide, if Xi Jinping and his Communist Party minions so decide, then there could be something. But hopefully there will be more normalcy and less friction. That will be good for the whole world. I'm sure the Chinese also understand this. So let's see how it goes. But I think things could get better. And let's hope so.